Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. Today is Saturday, August 14th, 2021, and we are in Judges chapter 4, and I'm going to try to cover chapter 4 and 5 tonight. They fit together. This is the story of the judge called Deborah and what she achieved, and she's very notable. And let's just start in chapter 4, verse 1. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who ruled in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagayoim. Because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Now, again, we're mentioning Ehud. He was the judge that ruled for the longest period of time and early on influenced the largest section of Israel. However, he gets mentioned several times as he's the guy that everybody early on mentions. Thing is, several people followed after Ehud. If they had followed one after another, we would have thought, okay, Ehud and then Shamgar and then Deborah and whatever. But Shamgar was in the southwest part of the country, near the Philistines and in the territory of Judah. Deborah, it gets mentioned here, that we're fixing to get to in verse 4. Though where they are geographically, this king of Canaan who reigned in Hazor. Hazor is in the central part of the country, on the kind of the eastern side, but it's the central east part. And it's fairly centralized in Israel. And the Canaanites there, they lived on the plain. They didn't live in the hills. And he controlled the plains because on the plains you could use a chariot. The wheels would get you over ground, and over fairly flat ground the horses could carry it around. In the hills it was too rough and too steep for horses to carry the chariot up and down. Literally, if you got a horse strong enough to pull it up the hill, the horse itself was massive. Very few horses could do that. But then coming down the hill, you had the problem that they hadn't invented brakes yet. The chariot would overtake the horse and run the horse down. So hilly country was not chariot friendly. And the Israelites had captured the hill country because, well, they were on foot, and when chariots bogged down as it got too steep or too rough, they could scramble over the sides and take it. The chariot fighters knew that, and they stayed down on the plain. And a chariot was a virtual tank in the day. Is the equivalent for foot soldiers of a tank today. You just didn't take on a chariot by yourself. Very hard to take on a chariot with a group even. It could be done, and eventually it would be done by the Israelites, but very hard to do. And Sisera, the general, had 900 iron chariots. Iron was very expensive then. Iron working was very rare, and they'd spent a lot of money to get that many chariots. And a chariot crew, there was a driver and at least one soldier, and very often as many as 6 in a chariot. And it protected the riders, and It could be used as a trample weapon. It could be used as a fort. You know, a very, very good place to launch projectile weapons like arrows or javelins or spears. Uh, Even that, though, if you were doing hand-to-hand fighting, you were up above the enemy, and because the chariot wheel and axle kept it off the ground, and you could strike from above, and it was harder to defend that way. It was easy to defend the chariot, hard to defend yourself from the chariot attack, and they had the advantage of the high ground automatically. So a chariot was a fearsome weapon when it was mobile. And so on the plains, the Canaanites maintained control with their chariots. And in the hills, they had the disadvantage and basically relinquished the hills to the Israelites. But when God wanted to punish the Israelites for worshiping these other gods, he let the Canaanites win. And so for 20 years, they had to serve the Canaanite king. And then they got tired of that. And they finally repented and cried out to God, humbled themselves, prayed, sought his face. Now let's start in verse 4. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lipodoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Now, several things about Deborah here. She's referred to as a judge, and what is described about her is that she is basically holding court. She's deciding court cases, so she's acting as what we would think of as a judge. The judges we've seen so far were warriors. And so she's the first one that in English we would consider to be a judge. That's kind of an interesting point. And she did it while the king of the Canaanite king was in charge. She wasn't trying to be a national leader. She was just helping resolve civil suits. And it was not part of the national government's job to resolve civil suits. Most cases, you let locals figure it out and you solve it, and group decision or somebody that everybody respected in the community made the decision, or there's all kinds of different ways where it happened. The one we've constantly mentioned is the Israelites, the old men sitting at the gate that were basically too old to do anything else. They sat at the town gate, and somebody had a dispute. They came up to them and told their side of the story, and the opposing side told their side, and then the old men passed judgment because they were supposed to be wise and experienced in life, and they would render judgment then. And Deborah was viewed as a wise woman. So she had gotten a reputation for being just. And she was in Ephraim. She was in the same part of the country where this Jabin and his general Sisera were ruling. Now, she was in the hills, and they probably didn't send the army there very often. And so, in effect, She was living in a little pocket that was Jewish and or Israelite, and where the Israelite customs held sway, but they would still tax that area. And she's received a word from God, and that was to tell this Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh, and commanded him in the Lord's name to go gather an army and go to Mount Tabor, and that would summon Sisera and with his chariots and his army, and Barak would go defeat Sisera at this place. That's what she tells him to do. The word of God came to her, and she told. And she was going to sit there under the palm of Deborah, where she lived and worked and did her job, and expected Barak to do his job. He was going to be the military commander. He was going to win. You know, that should have been it. Verse 8, Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." So he's basically saying, I don't believe I win, and I don't believe people will follow me, and I know that people respect you, and if you go, then I will go and do it, and if you don't go, I'm not going to even try. I don't put that much faith in God. Kind of a sad statement for him. Verse 9, "Very well," Deborah said, "I will go with you, but because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him. So because Deborah went with him, he did what God told him to do, but Deborah had already warned him that a woman would be the hero and win the day and kill Sisera, and it wouldn't be Barak that got the credit. Such happens when you don't obey God correctly. He gives the honor to somebody else. And notice, she's from Ephraim. She's telling him to summon his tribe and the tribe that lived next door to him, basically. They were also in the area where Canaan would be in charge. They also had some hill country, but a lot of plains. And obviously the king of Canaan controlled the plains. And he was beginning to establish a kingdom that was the central command because of his chariots. And he was in command of his own people, but he was, more importantly, suppressing the Israelites and oppressing them. And so Barak calls, and 10,000 men come, and Deborah went with him because she made that promise she would. Verse 11, "Now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Za'anim near Kadesh. When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together the 900 iron chariots and all the men with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, 'Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?' So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and the army by the sword, and Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. All the troops of Sisera fell by the sword, not a man was left." Now, it's interesting. they were fighting on the side of the hill, the mountain, and it's relatively flat ground. It does rise toward the top of the hill, but it's for hill country. It's not rough like most of the hills in Judah. It is a fairly gentle slope up. Um, Even today, it's not rutted and with gullies and that kind of thing. So it's fairly flat. A good chariot driver could drive over it and not be affected by things as much as in the rest of the hill country. So the Sisera was lured into thinking, well, I can fight there. It's not the best, but my superior weapons will still win the day. And then, of course, the Lord routed him and his people. And he realized, I'm in trouble. And so he abandoned his chariot and left on foot. It makes no sense for a person to abandon the chariot and leave. If you're going to flee, turn the horse around and ride the chariot out. Yeah, your horse and chariot can run faster than a man, and definitely farther. And if you're going downhill, definitely faster and further. It made no sense for him to abandon the chariot. This had to be the Lord fighting and causing him to make foolish decisions and flee. And his army fled. And Barak did his job, and his army did the job, and they killed every one of the soldiers in the army, destroyed the army. Nobody escaped. And they went all the way to the gates of the city they came from, the king's city, and nobody made it in the gate. So a great victory was had that day. They defeated the army, absolutely annihilated it. But we still have Sisera on the loose. And we learned about this man, Heber the Kenite. The Kenites were descendants of Moses' brother-in-law, his wife's brother. And they had traveled with Israel from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, and they'd resided with them the whole time. And Moses had promised them, if you go with us, God will bless you, and if you don't, God will curse you. The descendants of Moses' in-laws stayed with Israel by and large, and they dwelt among them, and they worshipped Yahweh, and God had blessed them, and they prospered in the land. This is a good indication that it's the worship of Yahweh, not your bloodlines, that really matters. The Israelites missed that point, but God was clear in blessing them too. Anyway, he had moved away from his relatives. They had land elsewhere, but he moved near Kadesh. It's not said why he moved there, but he just did. It's unimportant the reasons why he was there. That's just where he was. Verse 17. Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because they were on friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks, 'Is anyone here?' say no." So he's trying to escape the battle. and he's trying to hide with somebody that he thinks has good relationships with him. And a little bit of interesting history here. Most of the people in the land lived in tents and actually lived a fairly nomadic life, very similar to the Bedouin of today. Um, they also had an interesting system. Not everybody lived in the same tent. They would have several tents in the same compound. There would be a men's tent where all the men would live. There would be a women's tent where the women lived and the children that were under a certain age. And then there would be a communal tent, generally reserved for eating and that kind of thing, and meeting with visitors and that kind of thing. Now, men did not go into the women's tent unless the woman invited him. And normally in that culture, when a woman invited a man into the tent, it was a sexual invitation. The women knew what was going on. Everybody kept up with everybody's business because, I mean, it's a tent. Come on, you know what's going on. Even if you're outside the tent, you know who's in the tent and you know what they're doing. You can hear it. I mean, the women knew what was going on. And so, it was just the culture. The woman played the politics. Give me, an hour of privacy, and I'm going to invite him in, and we're going to have our time. And then, next time you need a favor and you want to invite your husband over, I'll help protect things for you. That's kind of the way it went. A man entering a woman's tent was just a social no-no. Everybody would assume there were sexual relations going on, even if there wasn't. So Sisera is trying to hide because he wants to sneak into the tent where nobody knows he is and nobody would expect him to be, and therefore hide until the trouble passes, and then maybe he can sneak home and save his life. Well, and so he asked to be hidden inside the tent, and Jael, the wife, and by the way, Jael is a Jewish name, a Hebrew name, not a Kenite name. So she was a Israelite married to a Kenite, and they did that. They intermarried, and eventually, with time, they would merge into one people. And by the time the Babylonian captivity was over, they were merged into the Israelites. But at this point in time, they were separate clans, but they intermarried. And so they're intermingling genetically. And so Jael is probably favored toward the Israelites. Her husband, though, is allied with the Canaanites. And so Sisera thinks, this is the wife of my ally, and I'm safe. And nobody's going to look for me in the women's tent, and asks to be hidden. And she covers him up with a rug so he's not visible. He's thirsty. He asks for some water. She doesn't just give him water, she gives him milk, which was much more expensive. And it was a food as well as drink and quench thirst. Fairly recently, science has discovered that as far as quenching your thirst, milk is actually better than water. She's being very generous to him, so he thinks he's very safe in her hands. And he asked that she stand in the door, stand guard. Nobody's going to attack a woman, particularly in her own tent. I mean, that gets the whole clan against you. Obviously, you just don't. And ask her to lie. That is anybody here? So tell them no. Well, we have no record. She said that she would, but she probably assented in some sort of way to lie for him. Verse 21. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Don't mess with a woman. you know, um, she's used to hard physical labor. She probably helped set up tents. It was physically laborious to make a living that day. Even if she, you know, all she did was weave cloth and cook and things like that were totally a woman's preserve, and somebody else did things. She did things like carry water from the well. Very strong, laborious things. And so she took a tent peg, and when he was sound asleep, and a hammer, and drove it through his temple, the weakest part of his skull, and drove it into the ground through his skull, of course, killing him. Probably did it through the covering over him. She was like, I'm going to get rid of this guy. And, you know, he dies at a woman's hand. Verse 22. Barak came by and pursued Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. Come, she said, I will show you the man you're looking for. So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the Canaanite king, until they destroyed him. So it was the beginning battle where the Israelites eventually conquered the Canaanites. And that's because Barak obeyed Deborah, the judge, who told him God's word. Now, he didn't get credit for killing Sisera because he did it. He insisted that Deborah go with him. And Deborah did, because she wanted him to do what God told him to do. And she knew if she went, he would do it and win the battle. And if he didn't, he would rebel against God, and then the land would be that much worse, because that was another offense against God, because he didn't obey. So Deborah went, and just like she prophesied, a woman would get the credit for winning the battle, for killing Sisera. And Jael did. She killed Sisera. And so the whole army, the general, was causing Jabin's success. The whole army was killed. The general was killed, and it became the turning point in the war between the two. And Israel eventually conquered the Canaanites. That's the story, and it's very interesting. Then Deborah, though, is very obviously a poet, a singer, because chapter 5 is her song, which she wrote to commemorate this event. And I want to read it to you because it gives some more details, and it's in poetic form, and of course it's Jewish poetry, which is in couplets, one idea and the idea stated again, or an idea and the opposite idea stated. So it does translate well into any language. It's not based on meter and rhyme and things like that English poetry is based on, but based on ideas. And so let's read this Song of Deborah. And this is chapter 5. It starts in verse 1 and will go literally through verse 31. There is a half a verse at the end then that is not part of the Song of Deborah, but I'm going to read the whole thing, including that last little piece, and then we'll go back and deal with individual parts of it. On that day, Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang this song. When the princes of Israel took the lead, when the people willingly offered themselves, praised the Lord. Hear this, you kings, listen, you rulers. I will sing to the Lord, I will sing, I will make music to the Lord, the God of Israel. O Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom, when the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the roads were abandoned. Travelers took to winding paths. Village life in Israel ceased until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. When they chose new gods, war came to the city gates, and not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord. You who ride on white donkeys, sitting on your saddle blankets, and you who walk along the road, consider the voice of the singers at the watering places. They recite the righteous acts of the Lord, the righteous acts of his warriors in Israel. Then the people of the Lord went down to the city gates. Wake up, Deborah! Wake up, break out in song! Arise, O Barak! Take captive your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then the men who were left came down to the nobles. The people of the Lord came to me with the mighty. Some came from Ephraim, whose roots were in Amalek. Benjamin was with the people who followed you. From Machir, captains came down. From Zebulun, those who bear a commander's staff. The princes of Issachar were with Deborah. Yes, Issachar was with Barak. Rushing after him into the valley, into the districts of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. Why did you stay among the campfires to hear the whistling for the flocks? In the districts of Reuben there was much searching of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he linger by the ships? Asher remained on the coast and stayed in his coves. The people of Zebulun risked their very lives, so did Naphtali on the heights of the fields. Kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Taanach by the waters of Megiddo, but they carried off no silver, no plunder. From the heavens the stars fought, from their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. Then thundered the horses' hooves, galloping, galloping, go his mighty steeds. Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse its people bitterly, because they did not come to help the Lord against the mighty. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for a noble, she brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell, there he lay. At her feet he sank, he fell, there he sank, there he fell, dead. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she cried out, Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of his chariots delayed? The wisest of her ladies answered her. Indeed, she keeps saying to herself, Are they not finding and dividing the spoils, a girl or two for each man? Colorful garments as plunder for Sisera, colorful garments embroidered, highly embroidered garments for my neck. All this as plunder. So may all your enemies perish, O Lord, and may they who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. Then the land had peace for 40 years. The Song of Deborah recounts this battle. It recounts things that may or may not be totally factual, but were realistic. Um, and one of the things like was the speculation of what Sisera's wife was saying while she waited for her now dead husband to appear. Uh, that would be something very common for a warrior's wife. Why is he delayed from battle? Well, she's going to be hoping that he won, particularly if he was used to winning, like Sisera was. And, oh, well, it does take time to capture the plunder and divide it up fairly among your men and then bring it home. Um, if you get beaten but you still come home, you come home quickly. You run home for your life. If you get defeated, obviously you never come home at all. And they're waiting on the army, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting. Well, why would you be waiting? I mean, let's face it, they had iron chariots, they had superior tactics, they had a professional army against straggling volunteers. They'd always won the wars before. Jabin the king was extending his rule. Why would they lose? That's not the way to bet. So they're having to come up with an explanation. And Deborah is, yes, imagining, but imagining what the kind of thing they would say. Others, she's castigating the rest of the people that didn't come help Barak. Now, Barak was told to get from Naphtali and Zebulun, and he did, and he was told to get 10,000 men, and he did, from those two tribes, and he led that army to success. That's what Deborah told him to do. But she also points out that the other tribes could have volunteered to come with him and could have been there for the victory, but they did not. And she describes each tribe and where they were and what they were doing. Part of this is Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, would have only been dealing with the areas near him, with Ephraim, with Naphtali and Zebulun. There was another tribe mentioned, and I'm passing it by right now. And anyway, they it was not directly mentioned, but Ramah and Bethel were in Benjamin. That was the other tribe that had been affected by Jabin. These other tribes she mentions, by and large, were not affected by Jabin and his army because they were outside that range that he could go with his chariots and be effective. And so the only tribes involved were the tribes that Jabin was affecting. That's why I say this is regional. It also mentions Ehud again. And it's in a different area. Ehud apparently affected the whole country and ruled, in a sense, the whole countryside, at least made his name known across the whole of Israel. But Jabin only attacked the central part where the Canaanites had lived and where these four tribes were. He didn't get down into Judah in the south. He didn't get up into Dan in the far north. He didn't get to the sea and the tribes that were over there. He didn't get up to Issachar and Reuben and things like that. But she praises the two tribes that did respond and gives the others grief for not volunteering and helping their brothers. Now, the thing is, this was a tribal society where a lot of the tribes would go, why should I go bother um, risking my life to defend, uh, you know, Ephraim when they haven't helped defend my territory and take it. So I'm going to defend my land, and they can defend their land, and you know, because they're Israelites, I'll do trade with them in preference to other people, but not, you know, I'm not going out of my way and risking my neck to defend them. And that is part of the problem with the Israel, the Confederation of Tribes, is there's no central authority, no reason to go out and be united, and they're a fractious bunch, and they don't fight any wars between themselves, at least initially. We do get to the end of Judges, war between the tribes, but you know, they are mainly concentrating on trying to drive the people out of the land that had been there first, but they're not cooperating to do it. If they had cooperated and put a unified front on there, instead of 10,000 men from two tribes, even if you just do simple math, that would be 60,000 men from 12 tribes. And in a day when most armies were, well, 900 chariots, and if you put, say, 7 in each chariot, you know, that's still only, you know, 6,300 men. You know, that was as big as the chariots were in that day and time. And that would be probably actually larger than Sisera's army was. So they had the larger army, inferior weapons, and inferior tactics, and inferior training, and probably inferior hand weapons and armor and stuff. But on the other hand, God had given them the victory and caused the hearts of the men of Sisera to tremble in fear. And so they fell before the Israelites. In fact, every one of them died. You know, what would have a 60,000 man army done? Well, probably wiped all the Canaanites out. Not just the army, but they'd been able to go on and march and take the city down and take the city and kill everybody in it and, you know, depopulate the plain. You know, if they'd been unified in doing it and unified in worshiping God, and they would have won a very good victory. Instead of just being a decisive turning point and eventually they win and eventually they kill Jabin, they would have been just victorious that week and been done, you know, but because they didn't unify. And she's pointing that out, that, you know, if they had stood united together, Jabin would have been nothing and been gone and his people gone. And then, you know, the next year they could focus on a different area and wipe its people out and so on and win. And really win the land, just like Joshua and the people did. But they didn't. And, you know, she points out that the people from the other armies, and she names some of the cities that were in the Canaanite cities, and their leaders came out and fought. But God intervened, and they destroyed it, and they turned in fear, and they ran. You know, and then she praises Jael, the wife, the woman that killed Sisera. She did right, actually did extravagantly good for Sisera. She comforted him when he was needing rest. She gave him not just the water he asked for, but the more expensive and more beneficial milk um, gave him um, what would have been a nice gift, acted like she was on his side before she killed him. She did the hospitality correctly, not just what he asked for, but above and beyond. And she was generous. And then she did the Lord's work and killed Sisera. And, you know, she struck and killed him. And then, and the poetry there repeats this, and it's a couple of couplets. It says it actually 4 times if you read it carefully, that she killed him. That's a poetic device to say that, hey, this is the very height of this poem. It's the very dramatic point of it that a woman killed a man in battle. That was unheard of in that day and time. Even today, it's kind of a rare statement. Women aren't normally the soldiers. Well, she wasn't a soldier. And she was killing arguably the strongest warrior for the Canaanites. And how did she do it? Well, she did it with her own strength, yes, but she also did it with kindness. Sure, come in. I'll cover you up with a blanket. We'll hide you. Oh, you're thirsty? Let me give you some milk. Here, eat, drink, rest. And he goes sound asleep because he's been running hard. He's tired. He's been in battle hand to hand. It's vigorous. And now he's fled from the chariot on foot, and he's run a long way trying to outrun the army. And he's hiding. He's tired, and he falls asleep. And she takes a tent peg, drives it through his temple, and kills him. And then she invites Barak in and says, here's your enemy. You can have him. Get the trash out of my tent. Kind of the, intent. And then the lament of the women that are waiting for their men. Their men aren't going to come back. And they're waiting, and they're waiting. Why is it taking so long? And they should be back. It's dark, and they were supposed to be back by dark. Why are they taking so long? Oh, it must be they're dividing the spoils. They're coming up with excuses for why the men aren't coming back. Because they can't face the fact that our men lost in battle. But they lost in battle because God defeated the enemy. And then Deborah ends with this praise of God. May all your enemies perish, Lord. May they be, may those who love you be like the sun and rises in its strength. Just this glorious little piece. And Barak was not the judge. He did not get to rule. If he had gone without Deborah, he would have probably got Sisera himself, and he would have got a chance to be a judge. Barak was only a fighting man because he did not obey God. And Deborah was the judge. What an honor he lost because he was not bold enough just to do the job God told him to do. Gracious Lord, help us to be bold in doing what you tell us to do, that we would be people who proclaim you, try to convince people to worship you, to love you, to obey you, that we would be your servants here on this earth. Have us to humble ourselves and pray and seek your face and turn from our wicked way and follow you, your righteous way. Lord, help us to be the people that are bold in obeying you and not passive, not wanting somebody else to with us, that that somebody else would get the glory, but that we would do what you tell us to do, and we would get the appropriate glory that you give us. In your gracious name, amen. I hope to see you Wednesday night, and if not, we'll see you back here next week. Have a blessed week.